bread was 7 cents a loaf, gas 10 cents a gallon, a pound of Maxwell House coffee was 32 cents. A nice car would have cost you about $400, while a decent home would be around $5 grand. All the while, the average labor in the United States earned around $20 a week. So I guess that'd make this 1933. And today, I'd like to talk about this. Hey old souls, this is Reed from Everyman Vintage, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Storied Sounds, where we look at vintage instruments and vintage guitars through the lens of the stories they bear, not so much the price tag that they carry. As we mentioned in the intro, it's 1933, and today we are examining this 1933 Gibson L-00. Now, just like all the guitars that are featured on this channel, she's had some issues and lived a rough life, but the reason is because the guitar sounds so good, and I'm sure the owners could simply not put the thing down. Alright, so 1933 is the second year of production for the Gibson L-00. It is a more plainly appointed version of the previously produced L-00, which was still in production at this time. In 1933, this guitar would have cost you $25, which was a little bit more than the average wage for a laborer at that time. As far as specs go, this particular instrument should have mahogany back and sides, mahogany neck. It should have an Adirondack spruce top, Brazilian rosewood fingerboard, and a rectangular Brazilian rosewood bridge. Additionally, it's an X-braced guitar, which gives it a certain structural integrity as well as a very specific tonal characteristic, and it has a silk-screened Gibson logo painted on the headstock. Now, the most common finish at that time would have been a what we call a tuxedo finish, a black finish with a white pickguard. This one, however, has a fire stripe pickguard over a small sunburst finish. Now, this particular instrument has had some things done to it over the years, so let's talk about its issues first. As you saw probably in the intro, it has a belly bridge rather than the rectangular bridge. So sometime, I'm guessing in the 1950s, somebody put that bridge on there, which leads me to another one of its issues. On the end block, if you look on the very bottom of the instrument, you'll see 3 small screw holes. This was something that people were doing in the 20s and 30s occasionally. They'd pull those glued down bridges off. They'd put a floating bridge on there and a tailpiece, presumably to maybe relieve some of the tension from the top. But at this point, somebody removed that. You can still see a little bit of a halo where that was in the top, but they removed that and put this Gibson style belly bridge, which means the belly of it is actually facing the sound hole rather than facing the bottom of the guitar like you would see in a Martin. This particular guitar also has some pretty degraded and crusty tuning buttons on it. I'm just not taking them off because they hold just fine, and I like to leave things alone if at all possible. It also had a pretty nasty back crack at some point in its history, which has resulted in that finish being touched up across the back of the instrument. It's also had a loose brace glued to the top on the inside. And it's had a new nut and a new saddle, both of which were made and fashioned from bone. The one thing that makes this guitar a little bit unique is that it has a mahogany top as well. So traditionally they had the Adirondack spruce, but I've been told by some pretty authoritative experts that early on, around 1932 and 1933, it was possible to see some of these guitars produced with a mahogany top. So it's a complete mahogany body with a single bound top. And yeah, this one is pretty special, and it's got a pretty special story as well. So before we go any further with the story of this guitar, it's probably worth noting that most of the guitars that will feature on this series and on this channel do not belong to me personally. They're just instruments I've had the opportunity to foster a relationship with over a number of years, as I've got a lot of fellow musician friends that have been playing a long time. And so most of the guitars we'll see on here don't belong to me. This one, however, is kind of my go-to guitar. This one is mine, and it's got a super cool story that I want to share with you. So when the guitar came to me, it had the original case, which if you've ever seen one of them, they are pretty much worthless when it comes to actually protecting the guitar, which actually had a big impact on this particular guitar's story. So when I got it, it had a little shipping label, looked like World War II era, stuck to the back of it. So I took a photo of that on my phone and I blew it up as big as I could to read it, and come to find out this particular guitar it was shipped from Camp Barkley, Texas, up to Chillicothe, Ohio. Now I did a little bit of sleuthing, which is one of my favorite things you can do with old guitars like this. Not always quite this fruitful, but this one I was able to find a couple of things. So it was mailed to a lady by the name of Mrs. Clarence E. Smith. And once I did a little bit of digging, I was able to find the 1940 census records. Now, Mrs. Clarence E. Smith was the wife of a Clarence Smith, obviously, and the Clarence Smith that had sent it back from Camp Barkley, Texas, was her son. He was the firstborn son of this particular family from Chillicothe, Ohio. And in doing all this research, I also found the enlistment records from this young soldier. He enlisted in the Army in October 22nd, actually, of 1942. And I found that Camp Barkley, Texas was actually an Army training camp just for a few years during the wartime. And so likely what happened was young Clarence either took this guitar from home with him, or he purchased it down there at some point when he was at Camp Barkley just outside of Abilene. And when he got shipped off to Europe, he sent the guitar back home to his mother. Now, because the case was not very protective, it resulted in that big back crack that happened in the back of the guitar. Now, that was fixed years and years and years before I ever saw the guitar. The finish was touched up and things of that nature. And we know in the vintage instrument world that absolutely crushes the value of this instrument. But that's really not what this channel is about. This channel is about demonstrating just how awesome vintage guitars can be because of the stories they bear, the way they sound, the way they feel, the way they make us feel. Not so much because they are extremely valuable. This one has had its value greatly decreased as far as money goes, but for me, these things have only added value to it. So the guitar was shipped back. We actually got this guitar from the original owner's, I believe, great nephew. The gentleman did make it back from Europe, and he ended up living, I think, to around the year 2000 or so. But the guitar has been played and the guitar has been loved. And these things are really special to me. So I take this stuff very seriously. This stuff I keep with the guitar. I keep folded up and inside the case so that wherever the guitar goes, its story goes with it. Now this guitar is just kind of the guitar I go to. Somebody at one point, another reason I date it's 1933 by the way, is somebody with pencil on the back strip inside had reached through the sound hole and inscribed September 1st, 1933. I'll see if I can get a good enough photo of that so you can actually see it. Just another piece of the guitar's history that I love. But over the years, the guitar has seasoned extremely well. Sounds really great, as you'll hear now. So there you have it, 1933 Gibson L-00. I hope you've enjoyed it. I thought this was a great guitar to start with. on Storied Sounds as our first episode. Now, not every guitar that we'll feature on here will have that complete of a story or that much documentation to go along with it, but I thought this is a great place for us to start to kind of highlight what I think and how I feel about vintage guitars and vintage instruments. You know, if they sound really good, if they feel really good, and if they help you feel connected to something bigger than yourself, and that inspires you to be a better musician, then that's what it's all about. And it doesn't really matter that the guitar has had certain things done to it to detract from its monetary value. I hope you have enjoyed this. If you have, go ahead and please like and subscribe. Go ahead and leave a few comments in the comment section if you want, but make sure you subscribe. That way you don't miss any of the other awesome guitars and awesome stories we're going to share with you on Everyman Vintage. Thanks.